was the summer of 2008 when I learned to teach. I guess at least that's what I thought I was learning. I was a PhD student in Dallas, and how they teach you to teach is they pair you with a mentor, tenured master teacher faculty member before they turn you loose in the classroom. So I got paired with a master tenured faculty member to teach this class, and it was a summer class. And so it was from 1 to 4 every afternoon in July. And it was in a room about, 1,000 degrees. And so we would lecture, and finally, after like 2 or 3 days of lecturing, I pulled my professor aside, and as respectfully as I could, I said, "So, Dr. So-and-so," I said, "we've been doing a lot of lecturing. Do we ever do any active learning activities that I have heard about?" And he said, "Stephen, my rule about teaching is I've never done an active learning activity that's not really bleeping impressive." And he said, and he puts his hand on my shoulder and he says, "And there's no activity that's bleeping impressive." And so we lectured for 4 hours a day, every day. And that's how I learned to teach. And I was very proud of that. So over the first few classes that I taught, I would lecture, and I perfected my lecture, and I got really good at it and really good PowerPoints until we ended up with something that looks a lot like this, which you've probably seen before. The authors of the great book Presentation Zen affectionately refer to this as death by bullet point. And so I would kill my students with bullet point because there's so much content that we have to have up on the screen, and we just read this, and I was what I considered a really good lecturer. And so I then started wondering, as I'm trying to keep my students awake, is this the best way to do things? Why are we lecturing? Why is this the gold standard of education? And so, if you will, let's take a quick journey through the evolution of the lecture. Let's rewind the clock to the 15th century. This is the 15th century classroom. This may or may not look familiar to you. If you just want to kind of make some casual observations about what's going on in this painting, you can see the guy up in the top corners talking to his friend next to him. The guy down below is kind of creeping on the cute girl next to him. The guy at the bottom of the screen has probably had a late night. He's catching a nap. And then in the front of the classroom is the professor, the bearded, I-know-it-all, purveyor of knowledge professor. And he's standing there, and he has this book. And the book is the birthplace of lecture. Because that's why we lecture, because back in the 15th century, there was one book. And the professor had the book, meaning he had the power, and he had the knowledge. And the way that he would teach you is he would read to you from his book, and you as the student would open your blank book, and you would write down every word he would say, and you would create your own book. And so after you have created a somewhat accurate version of his book, you would have your book, and now you had some knowledge, and you had some power, and you could go out, and you could be mobile and take this knowledge everywhere, and that's why we lectured. I mean, if you look at the very definition of the word lecture, it means to read. I am going to read, and you are going to listen or recreate what I am saying, and so that's what we've done, and that's why we lecture. But then something really scary for us fickle group of educators came along, something known as the printing press. And so we no longer had one book. No, we had hundreds of books. We had thousands of books. We had millions of books. We had so many books that we had to start building these things we called libraries to hold all of these books that we have created. But educators, we love tradition. And we love doing things the way that we have always done them. So we lectured. And we lectured. And we lectured in the 1600s. We lectured in the 1700s. Fast forward, and we are lecturing today just like I am lecturing to you. And so we lectured, and we have this love of lecture. And that has led us to the modern classroom. So the modern classroom, looks a lot like the classroom used to look like. But then in the 90s, something really exciting came along. We had the internet, and everybody had these computers. And so educators began to think, what can we do with this internet? We can educate the masses. There's no longer a need to be in physical proximity with one another to learn. We can take learning and educate everyone. But what did us educators who love tradition, what did we do? We recreated the modern classroom on online learning. I'm going to record my lecture over a PowerPoint. I've done this. And so you can listen to it, and then you can react to it. You can read my lecture and then react to it. And so this is online education. And so we're left with this. No matter what kind of advances we have in medicine, no matter what kind of advances we have in technology, in transportation, We do not have that many advances in education. We teach today like we have taught 100 years ago, 200 years ago, and before that. But do we ever really stop and think, why is this our signature pedagogy? Isn't that a fun word to say, signature pedagogy? It's just exciting to hear if you're a student, isn't it? But why is this what we do? Well, there is some literature that tells us about lecture. One of the studies that I love to refer to is done by Cleveland State University. And they said, in a study of a lecture-based course, those who had the course had no significant difference in knowledge than those who never took the course at all after 3 years. And so now, according to John Medina, it becomes not an issue of feasibility and practicality, it becomes an issue of ethics. We're charging students thousands and thousands of dollars to take these courses that a lot of them, my courses included, in the catalog say lecture-based. And we're charging them thousands of dollars. Are they really learning what we hope that they learn? Why isn't the brain doing what us professors and us educators hope that it's doing? Well, John Medina, one of the experts in how the brain works, he's got some things to say about why maybe the brain is not translating this lecture-based curriculum as much. He says the brain science community has this thing called the evolutionary performance envelope. And he said, we know that the brain is hardwired to learn and survive in outdoor, unstable environments in near constant motion. I'll repeat, the brain is hardwired to learn in unstable outdoor environments and near constant motion. And Dr. Medina continues, so if you wanted to create something that is in direct opposition to how the brain is meant to learn, you would create the modern classroom. And so here we are. And so I'm being a heretic. I'm up here saying we're doing it wrong. Is there an answer? Well, I think there might be an answer. You all have it in your pocket, okay? Some of you are on it right now. Not an iPhone, not an Android, but what this represents. It represents mobility. It represents community, and it represents content. Just think of the communities that you're all in right now because of your availability to be connected with one another as learners, as family members, as friends, as strangers around the world. Think of the connections that you've made. Look at the content that you have on your phone. Look at the content that you literally have at your fingertips right now. Within the next 30 seconds, all of you could have access to millions of pages of books in every language ever written in any period of time. All at the tip of your finger. But let's look at maybe some more fun content. What kind of content are we creating in community with one another? Let's just look at YouTube, for instance. Since I have started talking about the phone 60 seconds ago, 100 hours of YouTube content have been posted. If you want to take a broader bird's eye view of look at things, in the last 60 days, there has been more content posted to YouTube than all 3 major TV networks have posted combined in the last 60 years. But let's look at pictures, because we love to look at pictures on our phone, all right? For years, the biggest collection of photos in human history has been the Library of Congress. Millions of photos. It's hard to get your mind wrapped around that. But let's just put it in perspective. We love Instagram. I mean, I hashtagged this on Instagram yesterday. We're posting pictures. We're connecting with one another. I am able to show people all over the world my worldview. I'm able to see people's worldview from here in this auditorium, from this stage, this red dot right now. I'm able to see someone's point of view anywhere in the world. I'm able to learn from them. That's nothing in comparison to Flickr. But we're ignoring the behemoth, aren't we? Facebook. Approximately, right now, 140 billion pictures are on Facebook right now. In the next year, it's estimated that 375 billion digital pictures will be taken across the world. Of those 375 billion pictures, 70 billion, 20% of them will end up on Facebook. That makes Facebook 10,000 times bigger than the Library of Congress. And that's content. And that's scary for us educators, because as educators, I think, how can I leverage this? How can I use this to help my students learn? The good news for us educators is we don't have to, because students have been doing it for years. What if I told you that there was a system-based platform over social media, online, where people don't even have to meet each other, can learn in community with one another, overcoming problems in unstable environments that are unpredictable. They've been doing it since 1999. World of Warcraft. But maybe this picture's a little too intimidating. Maybe you should talk to my 6 and my 8-year-old about how they like to learn with kids from all over the world that don't speak their language, that they've never met and will never meet, but they're on this rewards-based system, learning, overcoming obstacles, learning in a safe community with Minecraft. And there are no professors on here. Students are doing this on their own. That's terrifying. So what does that do for me as a professor? What does that do to the modern classroom? It blows the four walls of the modern classroom away. So what can we do with this thing? What's so cool about this? How can I access students? Well, I teach social work. And one of the things in social work that we love to talk about is social justice. Social justice, the idea of equality, of equity, of doing away with the classisms, of doing away with all of the isms, of making sure society is just. I'm supposed to teach my students about this. Look at me. I am a white male. In 2015, in the United States of America, I am part of a group that is the most privileged group in human history. I teach about 85% females, 50% of which are females of color. What do I know about social justice? How can I, in my right mind, stand up there and lecture from a PowerPoint and tell these people social justice when they know 10 times more than me what it's like to be a victim of injustice? Well, that's what the power of the phone is. That's what the power of mobility and community is I can tell them, you know more about these issues than I do. Why don't I challenge you to go out into the community, to take pictures of your everyday life, things that are unjust, and then let's post them all together and let's talk about them. Maybe you end up with something that looks a lot like this. It's dirt. That doesn't look like social injustice, does it? It's Abilene. One thing you might know about Abilene, if you've ever been here, is that we don't have a lot of sidewalks in Abilene. That in and of itself is not a social injustice until you put this into context, that this picture was taken by a student who has spent their life in a wheelchair. That brings a whole lot of context to it. Something that I could never, ever realize, something that I couldn't lecture about, but something that now that student has taught me and has taught other students about what it's like to live with regular social injustice. Or let's look at poverty, for instance. Again, never missed a meal in my life because of poverty. I've never been poor. So how can I communicate to my students what it's like to be on food stamps? How can I communicate what it's like to have to take public transportation? Oh, but wait. What's the modern classroom now? How do you know what it's like to take public transportation? Let's go take public transportation. Let's send students all around Abilene to every bus route that there is, and then let's engage in a meaningful dialogue over group texts about what it's like to ride the bus and communicate with these people who have to do this, and maybe take away some of the stigma of some of those scary poor people and realize that these are real people too when you just sit beside them on the bus and you can communicate about that. Or maybe we talk about an issue as volatile as gun control in Texas. We talk about that, for it, against it, why that's important. Well, then that night, I'm flipping through the channels, and I see the movie Bowling for Columbine. You like Bowling for Columbine, you don't like Bowling for Columbine. It is a thought-provoking, polarizing movie. But it's late at night. I'm not in class. So what do? We utilize our mobility. We utilize our community. Post a tweet, hey, I'm going to be watching this movie. If anyone wants to join me for the next hour and a half, let's have a live Twitter chat about this and engage in dialogue with one another about these important issues. Because that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing with our students. That's the importance of this. We see real dialogue from students that are digital natives. When we, as educators, can overcome our fear and go into the atmosphere and go into the realm that students have been communicating their whole life, there's really nothing that we can't do and no way that we cannot access each other and the knowledge that all of us gain when we realize that maybe the professor doesn't know as much as we think that we do, and we rely on the knowledge of the students. Is it scary? Yes, it's terrifying for me. But that's okay. If you're scared, you're in good company. The teachers in 1703 were scared too. Students today cannot prepare bark to calculate their problems. They depend on their slates, which are much more expensive. What will we do when their slate is dropped and breaks? They will be unable to write. But they overcame. But 100 years later, another catastrophe in educational advances. Students depend on paper too much. They do not know how to write on a slate without getting chalk dust all over themselves. They cannot clean a slate properly. What will they do when they run out of paper? But they overcame. A new set of problems. Students today depend on store-bought ink. They do not even know how to make their own. When they run out of ink, they will be unable to write words or cipher until their next trip to the settlement. This is a sad commentary on modern education. But let's look at a quote that I didn't find on the internet. This is a quote that I really heard at a real conference. These mobile devices are going to be the death of me in higher education. How can we engage students if they are always looking down at their phone? I have a shoebox that I require all phones to go in before class starts. Because yes, we're scared. We're scared of distraction, but I'm going to challenge myself and my fellow educators that if a student is able to Facebook and text and tweet and Instagram during your class and still make an A, maybe that says more about me as a teacher than it does about them as a student. So here we are. The 90s were on the right track. Education anywhere, anytime. But I don't think we're thinking far enough in advance. I don't think we're thinking outside of the box or outside of the classroom enough. I'm going to challenge us as educators to leverage the power that we have of mobility, of community, and of content, and truly educate our students everywhere, all the time. Thank you.